The big meeting room was full of noise as creatures from many different worlds gathered together. They came from all across the galaxy for their monthly safety meeting. The room was huge, with tall walls that reached up to a glass ceiling showing the stars outside. Ambassador Zexthara stood at the front of the room. He was tall and covered in green scales that shined like oil in the light. His people, the Catherians, had been the strongest fighters in the galaxy for over 300 years. He looked at the papers in his hands and started to speak. "We have some small problems to talk about today," he said in his deep voice. "There are space pirates stealing from ships in the far areas of space. 2 groups of planets are fighting over who owns some empty rocks, and—" He stopped talking and his mouth curved up in what looked like a smile. "The humans are building warships again." The room filled with strange sounds. Some creatures clicked their teeth together, others made buzzing noises. A few laughed in high, squeaky voices. All of them thought this was very funny. Queen Voice Zacht represented the Hive Collective. She looked like a giant insect with 6 arms and big black eyes. When she laughed, it sounded like metal grinding against metal. Her voice came through a small machine that changed her bug sounds into words everyone could understand. "Warships?" she buzzed. "Those furry creatures still think they can fight with metal bullets and bombs that explode." "How silly they are," another creature spoke up. This was Ambassador Veltern from the Aquatic Federation. His skin was blue and covered with scales like a fish. Water dripped from his face because his people needed to stay wet to live. "My spies tell me the humans are putting something called rail guns and nuclear bombs on their ships. Such old ideas. Do they not know that our plasma weapons can burn through any piece of metal they shoot at us?" The laughter got louder. More creatures joined in, making their own strange sounds of amusement. The humans had been part of their big group for only 30 years. It all started when Captain Jake Morris flew his small ship near the planet Jupiter and met a Catherian patrol. Since then, humans had shown they were good at talking and making deals. They were also very good at building new things. But when it came to fighting, most aliens thought humans were like children playing with toys. "Maybe we should help them," said a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. Its voice sounded like wind blowing through glass chimes. "We could give them real weapon designs. It is almost cute how they keep trying to make these ancient weapons work." Far away from this meeting, Captain Danny Rodriguez sat in his chair. On a space station that flew around Earth, he was listening to everything the aliens said about his people. His face showed no feelings as he heard one species after another make fun of human weapons and ships. "Sir," said Lieutenant Amy Stone, who worked at the communication controls, "should we tell them what we really think about their comments?" Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "No, Lieutenant, let them talk. Sometimes the best thing to do is let your enemies think you are weaker than you really are." Deep in space, very far from Earth, the first human warship in 20 years moved quietly through the darkness. The ship was called the UES Retribution. It was huge, almost 2 kilometers long. Its hull was covered with weapons that looked old and simple compared to the smooth, shiny energy weapons that other species used. But looks can fool you, and humans had learned this lesson many times in their long history of fighting. Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of her ship. She watched the stars turn slowly past the big window at the front of the bridge. Her crew of 400 people had been in space for 6 months. The official reports said they were doing normal patrol work, but only she and a few other officers knew what they were really doing out here. "Ma'am," called Navigator Pete Wilson from his workstation, "we are getting the transmission from the council meeting about the security briefing." "Put it on the speakers," Grant told him. She listened quietly as the alien voices made fun of her species and their way of fighting. When the transmission ended, she turned to her second-in-command, Commander Steve Carter. "Well, Commander, what do you think about that?" Carter was an old soldier who had fought in the resource wars that almost destroyed Earth 50 years ago. He allowed himself a small, dark smile. "I think, ma'am, that they are about to learn something important. They are going to find out why humans are the only species that grew up on a world where everything was trying to kill them. The people working on the bridge looked at each other with knowing expressions. Unlike the peaceful species that controlled most of the galaxy, humanity had fought its way to the stars through thousands of years of war. They had learned to build new things because they had to survive. They had learned to never give up, even when things looked hopeless. Their weapons might look simple and old, but they had been made by a people who understood that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to hit it very hard. The other species in the galaxy had grown up on safe worlds where they did not have to fight to survive. They had learned to make beautiful things and to live in peace. Their weapons were made to look impressive and to show how smart they were. But they had never learned the most important lesson that humans knew by heart. That in a real fight, the winner is not the one with the prettiest weapon, but the one who is still standing when the fighting stops. As the Retribution continued moving through space, the galaxy remained peaceful and unaware. None of the aliens knew that humanity's first real warship was about to change everything they thought they knew about fighting. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you think you can beat easily, Commander. Grant looked out at the stars and thought about the long history of her people. Humans had always been underestimated. They had always been told they were not strong enough, not smart enough, not advanced enough. And they had always proven their critics wrong. Navigator Wilson, she said quietly, set course for the outer systems. I have a feeling we are going to be needed soon. The ship turned and accelerated into the darkness, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of an entire species. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons, but their refusal to accept defeat. 3 weeks after the aliens had laughed at human warships, something terrible happened that changed everything. A message went out to every planet and space station in the galaxy. The message came from the Hive Collective, and Queen Voice Zaxth sounded very scared. This is an emergency call to all council members, she said, her voice shaking through the translation machine. The hegemony has come back. I repeat, the hegemony has returned and they are attacking our outer colonies. That name made every creature in the galaxy feel cold with fear. The hegemony was the worst nightmare that had ever happened to their part of space. They were a group of 3 different species that had conquered half the galaxy 200 years ago. Then they had disappeared beyond the edge of known space, and no one had seen them since. They were stronger than everyone else, they were smart, and they showed no mercy to anyone who got in their way. Admiral Nextar of the Catherian Empire was the first to answer the call for help. His voice was strong and commanding as he spoke to all the military forces in the galaxy. This is Admiral Nextar. All available council forces must come to the Hive Collective border systems immediately. We will not let the hegemony take control of our space. What happened next was the biggest gathering of military ships in the history of the galaxy. The Catherian Empire sent 6 entire fleets of warships. Their massive dreadnoughts were covered with plasma cannons and protected by energy shields that could stop asteroids. The Aquatic Federation sent their fast cruiser squadrons that could turn invisible and strike quickly. Even the peaceful Silicon Collective sent their defensive platforms, which were like mobile space stations that could create energy barriers across entire star systems on Earth. The Emergency Council met in deep underground bunkers beneath the city of Geneva. President Carol Washington had once been a general who led the Pacific Alliance during the Resource Wars. She studied the tactical displays with the eyes of someone who had seen too much fighting. What do you recommend? She asked her advisors. General Tony Martinez, who was in charge of all Earth's military forces, spoke first. Ma'am, we have the Retribution already positioned near the conflict zone. Commander Grant has been running secret operations for months. She knows those star systems better than anyone. One ship against the hegemony? Asked Secretary of Defense Linda Foster. The Council is sending hundreds of ships. Sometimes, President Washington said quietly, one ship is all you need, but only if it is the right ship with the right crew. She paused and thought for a moment. Grant has my permission to fight if she thinks it is necessary. But Tony, she looked directly at the general, make sure she understands something. We are not there to show off to the council. We are there to stop the hegemony. Far away in space. The first battle between the council forces and the hegemony happened exactly as military experts would later say it should have. The hegemony ships were dark and seemed to swallow light itself. They came out of hyperspace in perfect formation. The combined forces of the galaxy's greatest military powers were waiting for them. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Cytherian plasma cannons were feared across the galaxy because they could burn through any known armor, but they bounced harmlessly off the hegemony's adaptive shields. The Aquatic Federation's invisibility technology was useless against sensors that could track ships across different dimensions. The Silicon Collective's energy barriers were broken by weapons that seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time. Admiral Nextar's final message was hard to understand. They have ... They have destroyed everything? Weapons we have never seen before. Our shields are useless. The entire Third Fleet is... The signal turned to static noise. Within hours, 3 more star systems had fallen to the hegemony. Their advance seemed impossible to stop. Their technology was so far beyond anything the Council had that fighting them seemed hopeless. Across the galaxy, panic spread as species that had known peace for centuries suddenly faced the possibility of being wiped out completely, deep in space. The UES Retribution received the battle reports in silence. Commander Grant stood on her bridge, studying the tactical data with the cold analysis of someone who had spent her entire career in the military. Her crew waited, knowing that humanity's response to this crisis would decide their species' place in the galaxy forever. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Commander Kelly Brooks, who was in charge of the ship's weapon systems, "the hegemony ships are using some kind of adaptive shielding. Every weapon system the Council tried was neutralized within minutes." Grant nodded slowly. "That is the problem with energy weapons, Lieutenant Commander. They are predictable. Energy signatures, frequency patterns, power outputs, all of it can be analyzed and countered." She turned to face her crew. "But there is one thing the hegemony has not seen in 2 centuries. Something they will not be able to adapt to because they have forgotten it exists." "Ma'am?" asked Executive Officer Carter. Grant's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Violence, Commander. Pure, simple, human violence. The kind that does not care about elegant solutions or advanced technology. The kind that just wants to break things and win the fight." She turned to her communications officer. "Lieutenant Cross, send a message to Earth. Tell them we are going to engage the hegemony in the Kepler 442 system. And Lieutenant," she paused, "tell them we are going to show the galaxy what human warfare really looks like." The message was sent through space at faster than light speeds. On Earth, President Washington received it in her underground bunker. She read it twice, then looked at her advisors. "They are really going to do it," she said. "1 ship against the entire hegemony force." "Ma'am," said General Martinez, "should we send reinforcements?" Washington shook her head. "No, Grant knows what she is doing. And besides," she looked at the tactical display showing the positions, "of all the ships in the galaxy, I do not think the hegemony is ready for what they are about to face." As the Retribution changed course toward the Kepler 442 system, the galaxy watched and waited. The Council forces had been destroyed. The greatest military powers in known space had been defeated in minutes. Now humanity's first real warship was about to face the same enemy that had crushed everyone else. Most species expected to watch the humans die just as quickly as all the others. They were wrong. They were about to learn that there is a big difference between being technologically advanced and being good at fighting. The hegemony had superior technology, but humanity had something else, the knowledge that sometimes the best weapon is not the most advanced one, but the one that actually works when you need it most. The Retribution moved through space toward its destiny, carrying with it the hopes of every free species in the galaxy. Commander Grant stood on her bridge, watching the stars and preparing to show the universe what humans were really capable of when they decided to fight. The Kepler 442 star system had been a busy place for trade just 2 days ago. Ships from many different worlds had come here to buy and sell goods. Now it was a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling plasma. The broken pieces of another council fleet floated in space. The remains of ships that had tried to stop the hegemony's advance and failed. The alien battleships moved through the wreckage, like hunters looking for. Their dark hulls seemed to eat the light from the system's star. These ships had never known defeat, and their crews moved with the confidence of conquerors. Hegemon Prime Krethak stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Dominion. He had 3 eyes that glowed with a cold light, and his body was covered in armor that looked like it was grown rather than made. He looked at the tactical displays with satisfaction. The return to the galaxy had gone exactly as planned. The younger species had grown weak during the hegemony's long absence. Their military thinking was old and predictable. Within a month, the hegemony would control the major trade routes. Within a year, the galaxy would once again bow to their rule. Hegemon, reported his tactical officer, whose head was filled with biomechanical parts that flickered with streams of data. Long-range sensors are detecting a single ship approaching from the galactic core. We do not recognize the design. Krethak's mouthparts clicked together in what might have been amusement. One ship? Have the council members grown so desperate that they send individual ships to face us? The ship does not match any known council design, the officer continued. It appears to be of human origin. A wave of interest passed through the bridge crew. The humans were a recent addition to the council. Their participation in galactic affairs had been noted but not considered important. They were a young species, barely out of their own star system, with technology that seemed almost deliberately primitive. Humans, said Krethak thoughtfully. I remember the intelligence reports. They still use chemical rockets and metal bullets. Amusing. Order the 3rd Squadron to intercept and destroy it. Consider it a demonstration to the remaining council forces. The UES Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Its angular hull was very different from the flowing lines that most galactic civilizations preferred. On the bridge, Commander Grant watched the tactical display fill up with enemy contacts. 47 ships, reported Lieutenant Commander Brooks, all showing the same adaptive shielding that defeated the Council fleets. Weapons status? Grant asked. All systems are ready, ma'am. Railgun batteries are loaded with tungsten penetrators. Nuclear torpedo tubes are flooded and ready. Point defense systems are online. Grant nodded, then opened a channel to the entire ship. This is the captain. In a few minutes, we are going to fight an enemy that has defeated every military force. In the galaxy, they think they know what to expect from us. They are wrong, she paused. We are not here to play by the galaxy's rules. We are here to remind everyone that before humans learn to reach for the stars, we learn to fight for survival. All hands to battle stations. The hegemony's 3rd Squadron moved to intercept the human ship. 12 sleek vessels that had just destroyed a Catherian battle group without taking a single loss approached the Retribution with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Human vessel, came the transmission from the lead hegemony ship. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Your weapons are primitive and your destruction is certain. Submit now and your death will be quick. Commander Grant's response was, broadcast on all frequencies, making sure that every ship in the system could hear it. This is Commander Lisa Grant of the United Earthship Retribution. I have a message for the hegemony and for every species in this galaxy that thinks they understand human warfare. Her voice carried the cold authority of someone who had seen too many battles. You are about to learn why humans are the only species that evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. The first hegemony ship fired its energy beam, designed to overload the primitive ship's power systems. The beam struck the Retribution's hull and spread out harmlessly against armor that had been designed not to conduct energy, but to absorb it and spread it out safely. Interesting, said Krethek from his flagship. Their armor appears to be specifically designed to counter energy weapons. Increase power and focus all fire on that ship. 6 more energy beams struck the human ship, each one more powerful than the last. The Retribution's hull glowed with absorbed energy, but the ship continued moving forward, seemingly unaffected by the assault. Return fire, Grant ordered quietly. The Retribution's main railgun spoke for the first time in anger. The tungsten penetrator, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, struck the lead hegemony ship before its sensors could even register that a projectile was coming. The adaptive shields, designed to counter energy weapons, offered no protection against a solid piece of metal traveling at incredible speeds. The hegemony ship simply stopped existing. The penetrator passed through its hull like it was made of paper. The kinetic energy release turned the vessel into a cloud of superheated metal and exotic matter in less than a second. For a moment, the entire system was silent, then chaos erupted. Across the hegemony fleet, as commanders who had never seen their technology fail suddenly found themselves facing something they could not understand. Impossible, breathed Krethek. No kinetic weapon can achieve that velocity. Their technology readings show chemical propulsion and metal alloys. How are they doing this? His question was answered by a salvo of nuclear torpedoes that lit up the darkness like newborn stars. The hegemony ships, their shields calibrated to stop energy weapons, found themselves helpless against weapons that did not care about frequency modulation or power absorption rates. Nuclear weapons cared only about the fundamental forces of physics, forces that were the same across the galaxy. Regardless of how advanced a civilization thought itself, the explosions were beautiful and terrible. Each nuclear warhead created a miniature sun that burned for several seconds before fading. The hegemony ships, caught in the heart of these artificial stars, were vaporized instantly. Their advanced technology, their centuries of military superiority, their adaptive shields, none of it mattered against the raw power of nuclear fusion. Within minutes, the entire 3rd Squadron was nothing but glowing debris. The Retribution emerged from the nuclear fire unharmed, her hull scarred but intact, her weapon systems already preparing for the next engagement. On the command deck of the Dominion, Hegemon Prime Krethek stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In 2 centuries of conquest, no enemy had ever destroyed even a single hegemony vessel. The humans had eliminated an entire squadron in less than 10 minutes. All ships, he ordered, his voice carrying a note of something the hegemony had not felt in centuries, fear. Converge on the human vessel, full assault formation. I want to know how they are doing this. But even as he gave the order, Krethek was beginning to understand. The humans were not using primitive weapons. They were using different weapons. Weapons based on principles that the hegemony had forgotten or never learned. The galaxy's other species had spent centuries making their energy weapons more efficient, their shields more adaptive, their technology more elegant. But the humans had asked a different question entirely, not how to make their weapons more advanced, but how to make them more effective. Commander Grant watched the enemy fleet reposition and allowed herself a small smile. The real test was about to begin. The hegemony had committed their entire force to this engagement, and she was about to show them what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. All stations, prepare for general engagement, she announced to her crew. And remember, we are not just fighting for humanity. We are fighting for every species in this galaxy that deserves to be free. The battle that would change the galaxy forever was about to begin. The space around the Kepler 442 system became a storm of violence as the remaining hegemony fleet moved toward the lone human warship. Hegemon Prime Krethek had ordered every ship in the system to attack the Retribution. 35 ships representing 2 centuries of military superiority and technological advancement were now focused on destroying one human vessel. They had never faced anything like the UES Retribution. The human ship moved through space with a grace that seemed impossible for something so angular and utilitarian. Where other species built their ships to look beautiful or to show off their technology, Humanity had built the Retribution for one purpose only, to kill enemy ships and survive the attempt. Every line of her hull spoke of a species that had learned warfare not as an art form, but as a necessity for survival. "Multiple contacts incoming," reported Lieutenant Commander Brooks, her voice steady despite the huge threat approaching them. "They are using some kind of formation I have never seen before." Commander Grant studied the tactical display, her mind automatically sorting through attack vectors and threat priorities. "It is a convergence pattern," she said calmly. "They are trying to overwhelm us with attacks from multiple directions at the same time. It is like a hammer and anvil tactic, but in 3 dimensions. "Ma'am," called out Lieutenant Cross from the communications station, "we are receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. The Council species are watching this engagement." Grant nodded without taking her eyes off the display. She could imagine the alien commanders watching, probably expecting to see the human ship destroyed like all the others. They still did not understand what they were witnessing. "Let them watch," she said. "Maybe they will learn something useful." The first wave of hegemony ships opened fire at the same time. Their energy weapons created a web of destruction that should have turned any ship into vapor. The beams struck the Retribution's hull and scattered like water hitting a stone. The human ship's armor absorbed and spread out the energy across specially designed heat sinks and protective layers. "Their shields are still adapting to energy weapons," observed Navigator Wilson. "They do not understand that our defense is not about stopping energy, it is about surviving it." The Retribution's response was swift and devastating. Her railgun batteries fired one after another, each tungsten penetrator accelerated to velocities that made them effectively impossible to avoid at combat ranges. The hegemony ships, their adaptive shields useless against kinetic weapons, died in flashes of vaporized metal and exotic matter, but the enemy kept coming. For every ship the Retribution destroyed, 2 more moved into position. Their commanders were slowly learning how to fight this new kind of warfare. They began using evasive maneuvers, trying to avoid the human ship's weapons while keeping up their own fire. "They are learning," noted Executive Officer Carter grimly, "starting to use proper tactics against kinetic weapons." "Good," Grant replied, surprising her crew. "It means they are starting to take us seriously." She turned to Brooks. "Tactical, prepare the special packages. It is time to show them what human creativity really looks like." These special packages were humanity's answer to the tactical puzzle of fighting forces that outnumbered them. While other species had focused on making their weapons more powerful or their shields more efficient, humans had asked a different question. How do you make your enemy's advantages work against them? The answer came in the form of what human military doctrine called adaptive munitions, weapons that could think, learn, and change their behavior based on what was happening in the battle. The galaxy's other species had never developed such technology because their conflicts had been brief and decisive. Only humans, with their long history of extended warfare, had seen the need for weapons that could evolve during combat. The first salvo of adaptive torpedoes looked like normal nuclear weapons to the hegemony sensors. The enemy ships maintained their formation, confident that their defensive systems could handle the familiar threat. They were completely wrong. The torpedoes split apart as they got close to their targets. Each one released dozens of smaller warheads that immediately began analyzing the enemy ship's defensive patterns. Some changed into kinetic penetrators when they detected energy shields. Others became electromagnetic pulse weapons when they identified critical systems. A few remained as explosives, but with timing sequences calculated to hit at the exact moment when the enemy's defenses would be overwhelmed. The hegemony formation fell apart as ships that had never experienced system failures suddenly found themselves blind, powerless, or simply dead. The adaptive munitions had turned the enemy's own tactical doctrine against them, using their predictable responses to create weaknesses that could be exploited. "Incredible," breathed Krethak from the bridge of the Dominion. "They are not just using primitive weapons, they are using them intelligently. How did we miss this in our intelligence reports?" His tactical officer, the biomechanical parts in his skull working frantically to process the engagement data, looked up with something close to fear. Hegemon, I do not think these weapons are primitive at all. I think they are designed to look primitive while using technology we do not understand. The realization hit the hegemony commander like a physical blow. They had underestimated not just human military capability, but human intelligence. The crude-looking weapons, the apparently simple tactics, the seemingly primitive technology, it was all camouflage, designed to make their enemies underestimate them until it was too late. All remaining ships, Krethek ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just realized he was fighting for his civilization's survival. Implement Pattern Omega, full assault on the human vessel. Do not let it escape to report our capabilities. The surviving hegemony ships, 15 vessels that represented the finest military technology of their era, moved toward the Retribution in a desperate final assault. They abandoned all pretense of tactical finesse, simply trying to overwhelm the human ship through sheer firepower and numbers. Commander. Grant watched them approach and felt something she had not experienced in years: pride. Not in herself, but in her species. Humanity had been dismissed, mocked, and underestimated by every major power in the galaxy. Now, in the heat of combat, they were proving that technological superiority meant nothing without the will to use it effectively. All hands, she announced over the ship's communication system. This is it. Everything we have trained for, everything we have built, comes down to the next few minutes. Show them what humans do when someone threatens our friends. The final phase of the battle began with a fury that would be remembered for generations. The Retribution, her hull scarred by energy weapons and her armor glowing with absorbed heat, stood alone against the concentrated might of the hegemony's remaining forces. By all logic, she should have been destroyed within seconds. Instead, she became death itself. Her weapon system cycled through firing solutions with mechanical precision, while her crew fought with the desperate skill of a species that had never known peace. The railguns fired again and again, each shot destroying another enemy vessel. The nuclear torpedoes created new stars in the darkness, each explosion taking multiple hegemony ships with it, but the human ship was not untouched. Energy beams scorched her hull, leaving glowing scars across her armor. One of her railgun turrets was destroyed by a lucky shot, and her point defense systems were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming fire. Hull breach on Deck 7. Reported damage control. We have fires in sections 12 through 15. Medical teams are responding to casualties. Grant never wavered. Continue firing. All weapons, continuous barrage, do not let them regroup. The battle raged on, a storm of violence that lit up the entire star system. The hegemony ships, despite their technological superiority, found themselves unable to cope with the human ship's relentless assault. Their adaptive shields could not adapt fast enough to the constantly changing nature of the human weapons. Their elegant tactics were useless against an enemy that seemed to thrive on chaos. One by one, the hegemony ships died. The Retributions. Weapons found their marks with deadly accuracy, turning the pride of the hegemony fleet into expanding clouds of debris. The human ship pressed forward, her crew working with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, their training and determination overcoming impossible odds. When the last hegemony ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, silence fell over the system. The Retribution hung motionless in space, her hull blackened and scarred, her weapon systems cooling after the most intense engagement in human history. Commander Grant looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They had done the impossible. They had defeated an enemy that had crushed every other military force in the galaxy. And they had done it not through superior technology but through superior will. The silence that followed the battle seemed to stretch across the entire galaxy. Where once 47 hegemony ships had moved with the confidence of conquerors, now only glowing debris fields marked where they had died. The UES Retribution floated motionless in space, her hull scarred and blackened, her weapon systems cooling after the most intense fight in human history. Commander Lisa Grant stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display confirm what her crew already knew. They had won. Not just a battle, but something far more important. They had broken the myth of hegemony invincibility that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries. Damage report, she requested calmly. Lieutenant Commander Brooks looked at her displays. Hull integrity at 73%. Primary railgun batteries are working but need maintenance. Nuclear torpedo reserves at 40%. We lost. 3-point defense systems, but main engines are fully operational. Casualties? 12 wounded, no deaths. Medical reports say all personnel will make full recoveries. Grant nodded, then turned to her communications officer. Lieutenant Cross, open a channel to the Galactic Council. All frequencies, maximum broadcast power. The transmission that followed would be studied by historians for generations. Commander Grant stood before the camera, her uniform torn from the battle, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had just fought for her species' survival. But her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had discovered exactly what her people were capable of. This is Commander Lisa Grant, of the United Earthship Retribution, speaking to the Galactic Council and all free species of the galaxy. 47 hegemony vessels have been destroyed in the Kepler 442 system. The threat to Council space has been eliminated. She paused, knowing that across the galaxy, alien commanders were staring at their screens in disbelief. The impossible had happened. Humanity had succeeded where every other species had failed. I want to address the comments made at the recent Council security briefing. Grant continued, her tone never changing from its calm professionalism. You laughed at our weapons. You dismissed our technology as primitive. You were wrong. The transmission switched to tactical footage from the battle, showing hegemony ships, vessels that had seemed invincible, being systematically destroyed by weapons that looked crude but performed with devastating efficiency. Human military doctrine is not based on having the most advanced technology, Grant explained as the footage played. It is based on making the best use of whatever technology we have. We do not build weapons to impress our enemies. We build them to kill our enemies. On the bridge of the Cytherian flagship Divine Wrath, Admiral Nexstar watched the footage with growing amazement. He had survived the initial hegemony assault by retreating with the remains of his fleet, a decision that had saved thousands of lives but cost him his military reputation. Now he was watching a single human ship accomplish what his entire battle group had failed to do. By the sacred flames, he whispered, they are not primitive at all. They are efficient. The realization was spreading across the galaxy as military commanders of every species analyzed the battle footage. The human weapons were not crude, they were purpose-built. The tactics were not simple, they were elegant. The technology was not primitive, it was practical. Humanity had approached warfare from a completely different perspective than the rest of the galaxy. While other species had focused on making their weapons more powerful or their defenses more sophisticated, humans had asked a fundamentally different question: how do you win? The answer had been devastating in its simplicity. You study your enemy's weaknesses, you build weapons they cannot counter. You train your people to think faster than their opponents. And when the time comes, you fight with everything you have, holding nothing back. The hegemony threatened every free species in this galaxy, Grant continued, her voice carrying across star systems. They counted on our divisions, our fear, our willingness to let others fight while we stayed safe. They were wrong about that. 2. The transmission ended, but its impact had only just begun. Within hours, emergency sessions were called in every major government across the galaxy. The species that had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers now found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about warfare, technology, and the newcomers from Earth. On Earth itself, President Carol Washington stood in the Situation Room, watching the battle footage with a mixture of pride and concern. The mission had been a complete success, but she knew that success would bring its own challenges. They will want to know how we did it, said General Martinez. Every species in the galaxy will be asking for our weapon designs, our tactical doctrines, our training methods. And we will share what we can, Washington replied. But Tony, make sure they understand something important. Technology did not win that battle. People did. Human people who were willing to die for something. Bigger than themselves? The president was right. In the weeks that followed, as the galaxy began to process what had happened at Kepler 442, a new understanding began to emerge. Humanity's advantage had not been superior technology or ancient wisdom or mysterious powers. It had been something much simpler and much more dangerous, the willingness to see warfare as a problem to be solved rather than a ritual to be performed. The laughter that had filled the council chambers was replaced by requests for military cooperation agreements. The species that had dismissed human weapons as primitive now wanted to understand the thinking behind them. The galaxy that had seen humanity as junior partners now recognized them as something else entirely, the species that had saved them. All 3 months after the battle, the first joint training exercises began. Catherian officers worked alongside human tacticians to understand kinetic weapons theory. Aquatic Federation engineers studied human armor design. Even the Silicon Collective requested access to human adaptive munitions technology, but the most important change was not in technology or tactics. It was in attitude. The galaxy's military forces had grown comfortable with their technological superiority. They had forgotten that warfare was about more than having the best weapons, it was about having the will to use them effectively. Commander Grant and the crew of the Retribution returned to Earth as heroes, but their real victory was not in the medals or the parades. It was in the knowledge that when the galaxy had needed them most, humanity had proven worthy of the trust placed in them. The Retribution was repaired and returned to service, but she was no longer alone. Construction had begun on 5 more ships of her class, each one incorporating lessons learned from the battle. The galaxy would never again be caught unprepared by threats like the hegemony. 6 months after the battle, the first alien delegation arrived at Earth's orbital shipyards. Ambassador Zexthara of the Catherian Empire, the same being who had mocked human weapons at the council meeting, stood on the observation deck, watching human workers assemble the hull of a new warship. "Tell me, Commander Grant," he said, his serpentine voice carrying a note of respect that had not been there before, "how did you know your weapons would work against the hegemony?" Grant, now promoted to admiral and in charge of the expanding human fleet, considered the question carefully. "We did not know," she said finally, "but we knew something else. We knew that if we were wrong, everyone in the galaxy would die. So we made sure we were not wrong." Zexthara nodded slowly. "Your species has taught us something important, Admiral. Technology is not about having the most advanced systems. It is about having systems that work when you need them most." "That is part of it," Grant agreed. "But there is something more important. It is about being willing to stand up for what is right, even when the odds are against you. That is what makes the difference between surviving and truly living." The alien ambassador looked out at the stars, where human and alien ships now patrolled, together protecting the trade routes and keeping the peace. "The galaxy is different now because of what you did." "We are all different," Grant smiled. "Good, that was the point." The age of human warfare had begun, and with it, a new era of cooperation and understanding among the species of the galaxy. The laughter had stopped, replaced by something much more valuable, respect. And in the depths of space, new ships bearing the flags of a dozen different worlds worked together to ensure that no force like the hegemony would ever again threaten the peace and freedom that so many had died to protect. The humans had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not the most advanced one, but the one wielded by people who refuse to give up. The galaxy would remember that lesson for generations to come.